Thank you for listening to The Real Deal with Damian Adams. This is Real Sports Talk for the real sports fan. And I definitely appreciate all you real sports fans who are listening right now. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, thank you. Please help a brother out and give me a 5-star rating. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th. That 5-star rating review will definitely be appreciated. If you're listening on the 3-Point Conversion station on Spreaker Radio or iHeartRadio, thank you. The 3-Point Conversion is where fans' opinions matter. Okay? So if you think the show is hot, say it loud. I think the show is hot and I'm proud. If you think the show can improve, don't say it as loudly. But please let me know, because I need both your praises and your criticisms to be great at my job. All right, I'm very excited about today's episode, as it is presented by fantasydata.com. That's fantasydata.com. Use promo code REAL411 and get 25% off. Go ahead and get that edge on your friends in your fantasy league so you get those bragging rights. Go to fantasydata.com. Use promo code REAL411. So I'm very excited about today's show. We're doing a short episode. I know I'm known for my long episodes going an hour and a half, 2 hours. This one's going to be shorter. It's just me and you, talking about The Last Dance. Last night was the last 2 episodes. I am recording this on Monday morning. So last night was the last 2 episodes of The Last Dance, the docu-series about the 90s Chicago Bulls. And it was a little sad. It was a little sad that it's ending, especially for someone like me who is such a big Michael Jordan fan, someone who had hoop dreams growing up and who still, hoops today. He's the reason basketball was put into my hand and the reason I continue to dribble that ball and shoot that ball and try to dunk and eventually dunk that ball is because of Michael Jordan. So I've enjoyed this series thoroughly. And I wanted to come to you today and talk about episodes 9 and 10. Of course, give my overall view of the docu-series. So let's get into episode 9. So episode 9 starts with the Eastern Conference Finals in 1998, which had the Indiana Pacers against the Chicago Bulls. The star player for the Pacers is Reggie Miller. Now, Reggie was one of those guys who wasn't going to be scared of anybody. Right, he believed in his ability. He's one of the greatest shooters of all time. If Reggie played today, his numbers would be phenomenal because he would be used in such a fashion when it comes to shooting threes all over the place. He probably would average, 11, 12 threes a game. And, of course, his numbers would be even higher when it comes to career-made threes. And he also had the ability, because he was so dangerous off of three-pointers, that you had to stick close to him. Next thing you know, he's driving past you, getting a layup. Even though he wasn't the best with the handle, he wasn't the quickest guy, you had to guard that three-point line. You had to guard the mid-range. You had to be on him at all times, like white on rice, like they would say. Because he gets pull up at any time. Next thing you know, he's at the goal getting a layup, or he's pulling up for an easy mid-range because he's got just that much space on you. And that's it. And I feel like we were robbed of a great rivalry between him and Michael Jordan. Because you had 2 great shooting guards. That's the matchup. And we only got to see them play against each other in the playoffs one time. Great series. The one series we got was great. But it was only one time, right? So that's why we remember more about Reggie versus the Knicks and Jordan versus the Pistons, because they played against each other in the playoffs year after year. And there was a real rivalry that built up there. There was some real hatred. With Reggie and Mike, it wasn't a hatred for each other. Reggie just wasn't going to be scared of him. And they had their little tiffs here and there. They showed the video of them, in the one regular season game where they're about to fight. So there was definitely a competitive edge there with those guys, but it wasn't a real rivalry, right? But going into the 98 series, Reggie believes that the Pacers were the better team. And they were stacked. You think about that team with the Davis brothers, Mark Jackson, who's, top 5 all-time in assists, Reggie Miller, like I mentioned, one of the greatest shooters of all time. Yeah, Jalen Rose coming off the bench at that time, who eventually became a very good starter. Also, the big center in the middle, the Ducking Dutchman, 7'4". So when you think about that team, they had everything to defeat the Bulls. All the ingredients. And honestly, probably should have done it. When you look at Game 7, and they're up with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, they start the game off hot, up by 12 to start the game. And back then, that was a significant lead. Now, if someone's up by 12, it's like, okay, we already know the other team's going to come back. This isn't going to be, some insurmountable lead that we can't come back from, because you could come down and switch 3-4 threes in a row now, and you're right back in the game that quickly, just like that. Back then, though, 12 points was major. You look at the final scores of a lot of these playoff games that the Bulls are in, 82, 78, 76, 70. Like, these were games that they were more entertaining than the Detroit Pistons games, those years that Detroit had that great defense in the early 2000s and mid-2000s with Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, those guys. They had some very low scores, but those games just weren't entertaining, especially the series against the Spurs in 2005. But the scores are very similar, and every basket matters so much. I was listening to one podcast with Steve Kerr, and he talked about how stressful it was to play in that type of environment. Like, he loves how it is today, how more wide open it is, because every shot isn't as stressful. Every shot doesn't matter as much, right? Back then, basketball was almost like football, to where every possession mattered so much. And that's one thing that makes Michael Jordan even greater. The fact that he was able to be as great as he was in an era where every shot mattered. And was still very efficient in an era where every shot mattered, and the defense was so much more compact, and you didn't have the easy driving lanes, right? Now, sometimes the defense does get overhyped. There's games that back then they didn't close out on the three-pointer because people didn't shoot threes like that. So the only people that you would close out to the three-point line for were the Reggie Millers and the Steve Kerrs and maybe the John Paxsons or Craig Hodges early in the 90s, right? There's only a few select people that you would stick at the three-point line. Now everybody can spread out and shoot, so you got to stick everybody out there. Even someone like a Joel Embiid can get you, 30 to 35% of his three-pointers made. So to think that in an era where the lane is constantly just filled up with people, Michael Jordan was able to drive through, dunk on people, get around people, work that mid-range game. That's tough. That's tough. Now, looking at some of my notes there, man. Game 4 of that series, right? When Reggie Miller makes that three, he has the famous play where he comes off the down screen. They switch it. Michael Jordan's waiting for him to come up. He comes, runs straight into Michael, pushes him, goes off to the side, hits the three on the wing, and gives the Pacers the lead. I love how Jalen Rose pointed out that Larry Bird didn't react at all, because he figured, man, they still got time on the clock. They got that dude named Mike. And Michael Jordan takes this shot with 0.7 seconds left. Has the double clutch. A great defense by the Pacers. They make him double clutch. And when he shoots it, everybody believes it's going in. Now, that speaks to the aura of Michael Jordan, and also the fact that the shot, honestly, the reason it didn't go in was just a little bad luck. You look at the shot, that looks like it should be good. And it just would have added more to the legacy of Michael Jordan, and maybe you don't get that Game 7 there. But awesome series in the 98 conference finals. And then the series, as they're showing that, they flash back to 97. The 97 finals, where Michael Jordan is motivated because Karl Malone got MVP that year, right? Karl Malone, great player. You don't get the second most points in history without being great. I understand that John Stockton was there setting him up for so many of those points. But only a great player will be able to take advantage of that to the point where you're the second highest scoring player of all time, right? So we got to give Karl Malone that credit. I understand that as an individual, Karl Malone might not be the best guy. So a lot of times as a player, people slight him and don't give him his due. Got to be able to separate it. So I'm not going to talk about, why he might not be the best guy. A lot of those things are, some is alleged, some's been proven, but on the basketball court, Karl Malone was a monster. You just got to give him that credit. He's one of the best power forwards to ever do it. Now, should he have won MVP that year? Probably not. But you can say that now about LeBron every year, right? Like, should Derrick Rose have really won MVP that year? Probably not. But LeBron was the villain in Miami that year. They had just made the big three. He had the whole infamous not 5, not 6, not 7 speech. So Derrick Rose was the beloved hometown hero who led his team to that number 1 seed that year. So the story fits out better. It was a better story. Derrick Rose MVP. So for Karl Malone 97 finals, MJ, of course, takes it personal. Like, that's the theme of the last 4 episodes, pretty much, that MJ takes everything personally. And MJ came through, right? And he knew that Byron Russell wasn't going to be able to guard him. He talked about how Byron Russell plays on the front of his toes. So if you give him a head fake, a shoulder fake, and go, you can get past him, get to your spot. And that's what he did. You have the famous game winner in game 1. And then, of course, you have the flu game, which we found out was actually the food poisoning game. They get pizza delivered to the hotel late at night, right? And from my understanding, Utah is not a place where a lot of places are going to be open late. It's not like a New York, LA, places like that where, pizza places and everything's going to be open till, 2, 3 in the morning. And you'll have all these different, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? The delis, like a Denny's or IHOP, something like that, be open pretty late as well, because you got people coming out the club who are hungry, drunk. When you're drunk and hungry, you're going to pay a little more for your food and get a little more food than you probably normally would. So it's always a good time to score if you're a restaurant. But Utah doesn't really have that, right? I haven't been, so I can't speak to it. But just from what I've heard, you're not going to get too much of a nightlife there, right? So they're not going to have places open at 10, 10:30 at night, whatever the time was that MJ was hungry. This is one pizza place. And the fact that this pizza place was open and 5 people come to deliver the pizza, which is a little weird, but I understand why MJ didn't think of anything of it, because he's probably dealt with that before. Whenever he's ordered food, whenever the Bulls have ordered food and people knew what hotel they were at, they probably try to see who ordered this particular food, who was there. Can I see Michael Jordan? And they probably should have disguised it better. Said, we're going to come pick it up. Now, I don't know if they had transportation to pick it up at that time, but have a trainer or assistant, whoever, go pick up the pizza. Looks like just a regular dude, and you get a good pizza. Now, I don't know if they intentionally messed up the pizza, but I wouldn't doubt it, right? You got Utah fans they showed how crazy Utah fans are, how loud that arena was. They showed how Phil Jackson had to have earbuds in his ears going to Utah. And get the pizza. 5 people deliver it. That's already kind of suspect. And the trainer's like, nah, I'm not eating this pizza. So MJ's the only one who eats the pizza and gets crazy sick. 2 o'clock in the morning. He's, hugging the toilet like we've all been, but from different reasons. Throwing up and whatnot. And somehow is able to play, and no one publicly knows what really happened. So that's why it becomes the flu game. And that's the part that is amazing to me, is that if this happens today, if LeBron James gets food poisoning during the finals, oh, everybody's going to know. The restaurant is going to have people boycotting and whatnot. People are going to find out exactly who made the pizza, who was there on the shift, who delivered it, what happened on the pizza. Like, there's going to be a slice left to be tested out and everything else. People are going to find out exactly what happened. So the fact that we thought it was a flu game for all these years is amazing to me. But it just shows you the difference today in the way the information gets out and how tight-knit teams are, right? Because information gets out because somebody on a team doesn't do a good job of holding that information in. Back then, you might have had a few people who really knew the story, but they was like, nah, we're not going to blow it up. The team said not to say anything. So you have the honor amongst the reporters who may have really known and the team. Today, that doesn't really exist. And the fact that he went out there with food poisoning and played 44 minutes and scored 38 points is amazing. Honestly, it's better than the flu game. The food poisoning game is, when you think about what he's going through, I've had food poisoning before. I couldn't do anything. Play basketball? What? And do it at a high level? What? Stop it. Bro, when I had food poisoning, I was just in the bed, at the toilet, in the bed, at the toilet. That was it. Pooping, throwing up, laying down. Pooping, throwing up, laying down. That was it. Playing basketball? It adds another notch in this belt. I know that we've put Michael Jordan on this crazy scale, but how can you not with things like that, man? So we're going to take a quick music break. When I come back, I'm going to continue to discuss The Last Dance. We'll be right back.
Brandy, Dog Child, Mace Kid, all them on the rise. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. I went from Ellie Hansons to mini mansions. The girls in the Aruba doing belly dancing. Spent half of my advancing, jaws from Branson to make it through my circumstances. But you know I'm wiser now, move like Kaiser now. Got a butter soft cover just to hide my pound. Got a house in the valley, come and find me now. Got enough dough to buy the town, so I might give a 6 to my chick, Benz to my mom's. Crib so big it look like the Synagogue. Give her a couch just to spill Henny on. And been a gone since Lotto's and Benetton. Come on.
Some people say that I'm not the same girl. They say I think that I'm in my own world. What makes them think that I have changed? Yeah. A little joke and now they raise my problems. You like you, I have to try and solve them. Yes, everything is quite the same. Whoa. I'm just trying to be me and me. Do what I got to do, what I gotta do. People think that I'm just sitting on top of the world. Sitting on top of the world. I'm just trying to be me. Doing what I got to do. Some people think that I'm just sitting on top of the world. Oh yeah, sitting on top of the world. Sitting on top of the world. Sitting on top of the world, top of the world, top of the world, top of the world. Sitting on top of the world, top of the world, top of the world, top of the world. Yeah. I wonder why it's often said in my life, fairy tale and everything is so right. I wish that you could know the truth. Yeah. My life is real, so please don't get it twisted. Problems the same and gotta be dealt with. These are the things I wish you knew. Always on someone's side. So many questions why. I wish that you'd be down with me, with me. Free to express myself. Always need someone else. I need to be free. It's not that easy. I'm just trying to be me. Do what I do. People think that I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm just trying to be me. Proving what I do. People think that I'm sitting on top of the world. Sitting on top of the world. Don't wonder just don't understand why. Friends who knew me back then, no, has changed. I still do the same.
Yo, you can cut the talking short if it ain't about cake. I ain't sitting on top, I want a house on a lake. I'm that snotty nose cat with a new BM. If you mess with Brandon, I got to bruise your chin. I be with Puff, the girl be like, who's his friend? If I hit a chick once, she probably move me in. So you got to tell me right now, either you're with the cats who make the hits or the one that see the chips.
Slow down, make shit killing me.
But don't stop it. What's the use of buying a wave? I'ma have to chop it. I used to love the lady till I learned the logic. She only mess with mace, know the money ain't no object. If it ain't Chris, he won't pop it. If it ain't platinum with ice, he won't rock it. If it don't cost 60, he don't drop it. If it don't come with TVs, he don't cop it. Nigga, stop it.
People think that I'm just trying to be me, proving what I gotta prove. Sitting on top of the world.
Brandy on top of the world. Dog chow on top of the world. Mace B on top of the world. What? All the world be on top of the world. Brandy on top of the world. Dog chow be on top of the world. $1 E all over the world. Brandy all over the world. All over the world. All over the world. Yeah. What? Yeah. What?
Welcome back to The Real Deal with Damian Adams. Hopefully you enjoyed that music break. Now we are back to talk more about episode 9 of The Last Dance. And episode 9 got really real because they told the story of, or more of the story of, Steve Kerr. Now Steve Kerr, somebody who loved basketball, but was a short white guy, not the most athletic, had trouble getting recruited, only had one scholarship at the last minute for the University of Arizona, and somehow turned that into a very long NBA career, which is now, after that turned into a good broadcasting career. People forget it. Like, he was really good as a broadcaster for TNT and turned that into being now probably the best coach in the NBA, right? Of course, Pop is still in, but as far as just the new guys, the new regime of coaches, Steve Kerr is definitely on the top of that heap. And one of the reasons that he's there is that he's, was able to turn tragedy into motivation and a reason to be so singularly focused, right? So with Steve Kerr, small guy, goes to Arizona, and his dad is a college professor. His dad becomes the president for the university, or American University, in Beirut. And gets killed while he's there. Man. And I thought it was very interesting that the interviewer asked Steve Kerr if Steve Kerr and MJ ever talked about the similarities in the facts of how their fathers died. He said no, MJ was somebody who at that point in his career was living a different life than all the other players. He had to, right? And you really weren't going to get to talk to him about that type of stuff because he was hard to get to emotionally, which I understand with how famous MJ was. We've talked about that on the last episode where I said, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could be that famous, if I could deal with the constant attention and pressure that comes with. With Steve Kerr, that going through something like that, man, while you're in college, while you're trying to, better yourself as a basketball player, and that's all you're focused on, everything gets thrown off. It takes amazing strength to be able to go through that and say, okay, I'm going to pour all my energy into basketball and not just crawl up in a ball right? And I couldn't imagine it. But I'm glad that they were able to tell that story for Steve Kerr, which made a lot of sense, right? A lot of people criticize like the poster for The Last Dance because it was Michael Jordan, Scotty, Rodman, then the background it shows Steve Kerr, which makes sense because Steve Kerr is the most famous of those other guys, right? It also makes sense because Steve Kerr has some big shots, and Steve Kerr has one of the better stories. Tony Kukoc has a great story as well, being from, I guess I shouldn't say great story, but a story that's compelling because of where he was from and what was going on in his country, right? But we get more details on Steve Kerr's story. And it hits you more in the heart. Even though what's going on with Kukoc and his country was horrible, with Steve Kerr, hits you more in the heart because you can feel it. Like, you can imagine that pain of losing a parent. Being from a war-torn country is not something that, as an American, you can truly imagine. You know it's horrible, but you can't really relate to it. With Steve Kerr's story, you can relate. And a lot of people have been through that, unfortunately, losing a parent in that way. Being the parent, not just losing them, but the parent being taken away. So I thought it was great the way they set that up and how it led to showing Steve Kerr's big shots that he hit for the Bulls. Another big thing that stood out to me, they did a trivia question. MJ and Scotty eliminated 7 60-win teams, the most of any combo in the NBA. So a lot of people, when they try to criticize Mike, will say that the 90s was a weak era. And you did have expansion, which was part due to Michael Jordan. The league growing was due to how big Michael Jordan got and how much he helped grow the league, so they were able to get more teams. The fact that you have 30 teams now has a lot to do with Michael Jordan. The fact that Dave Stern talked about how global the game is has a lot to do with Michael Jordan. So I don't think you should hold it against him that the league grew, and it takes years for the expansion teams to become good, right? But it's not like those expansion teams were the ones that MJ and Scotty were playing against in the playoffs. So that's why I don't get that argument. Like, they're going against the 60-win Utah Jazz, 60-win Seattle Supersonics. These teams, 60-win Orlando Magic that they swept in the Eastern Conference Finals in 96. Those teams were all very good to great teams. They didn't play against the expansion Charlotte Hornets in the playoffs or the expansion Toronto Raptors in the playoffs. That's not what happened. Another thing that stood out to me was when they showed the relationship between MJ, Michael Jordan, and Gus, one of the security guards. And it's another one of those tearjerkers, right? Because Michael Jordan really depended on Gus. He was going through a tough time dealing with the loss of his father and would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning sobbing, crying, deep cries, right? And would call Gus, and Gus would head right over. And we all need somebody like that in our lives, right? Usually it's our spouse, once we become adults. But with Mike, he needed that father figure, right? He was so close to his father, James, and he was always there, that it became a natural transition for him to depend on Gus in that same way. And it was really cool to see that human side of Mike and to see something just a little bit behind the curtain of who he really was. Rest in peace to Gus, who, they showed passed away in 2000. And I love how, Gus's wife talked about how Mike was there. Mike was the one who noticed he was sick originally and told her to, get him to the hospital or get him seen by a doctor. So it's showing that, Mike does have that emotional side that you just don't get to see because of how big he was. And one of the reasons that he only hung out with his security guards is because of how big he was. He just constantly needed security guards. And again, that's a tough life to live. And only a few people in history are truly built to live that life. You gotta give credit to those guys who, the Michael Jordans, the LeBrons, the Jay-Z's, the Beyoncé's, people who are on that level of fame, who tend to not mess up with all the pressure that comes with. I have major respect for that. Again, it has to be super hard. It comes with all the benefits. Don't get me wrong. I'm not crying a river for them. They have all the money in the world and, you know, all the benefits in the world of being that famous, but it's not easy. And again, it's not, we all have problems. And like the old saying goes, more money, more problems. So that was it for episode 9. Let's get into episode 10. So it starts off, you know, they're in the 98 NBA Finals. Jazz win game 1. Bulls win game 2 and then blow them out. The Bulls just smack the Jazz in game 3. Hold them to the lowest score ever. 54 points ever in a game with a shot clock. Crazy. And then Dennis Rodman misses practice after game 3 to go to WCW, be part of NWO. Now, I remember watching this as a kid. I remember seeing Dennis Rodman, and I thought maybe it was pre-taped or they did it at a different time for that particular segment. I understand WCW was live at the time, but I was young. I was like 8. That part didn't comprehend. So I was like, you know, dang, this dude is busy playing in the finals. He going out here to WCW. And the fact that he missed practice to go do that. Come on, Dennis. I understand that Dennis Rodman is a GOAT in his own right. You know, I talked about it, how he's in the Sniper Hall of Fame. Getting Madonna, Carmen Electra, you know, whoever else he had at the time. He definitely lived a life that a lot of people would like to live, right? Especially somebody in my age range, the 18 to 34 age range is like, dang, Dennis Rodman was that dude. But that's got to be annoying, right? They showed I believe it was the assistant director of player or public relations, who talked about how he had to get Dennis out the side door because there were 300 reporters waiting to ask Dennis Rodman about, you know, his sabbatical to WCW and to go join the NWO. So, no, that was definitely nuts. Dennis Rodman, he was a very interesting character. I really enjoyed his parts of the documentary as well. And I love how we had just one more incident to remind you of why episode 3 was one of the favorites for a lot of people, because Dennis Rodman doing Dennis Rodman things. So then you get to the rest of episode 10, where they're just basically showing what happened in the finals. Scottie Pippen's dealing with a back injury, right? So he barely can play in game 6. And let's rewind. Before we even get to game 6, game 5. Game 5, they could have closed the door and you had the celebration ready, which is very reminiscent of what happened in the 93 finals against Phoenix, right? So you would think that they would be cognizant of this and not let this happen, right? But they don't close the door on game 5. They have to go back to Utah for game 6, where Scotty, his back is all jacked up. He gets his first dunk, jams up his back. He's pretty much done, right? He's a decoy for the rest of the game. So it's on Mike to carry the squad, and he's not having the best shooting day. A lot of his shots are coming up short because he's so tired. But he continues just to carry the squad, right? That's why we think of him as the GOAT. So MJ, his awareness was on a different level. So in game 6, with less than a minute left, the Utah Jazz run a play where Karl Malone posts up on the right block, and as he's posting up, he's waiting for John Stockton to get open. John Stockton gets open, hits a 3. that is saved in Michael Jordan's mind. So a few possessions later, they go to run a similar play. Karl Malone posting up Dennis Rodman, which is already tough enough in itself because you know Dennis is going to fight you tooth and nail for each inch on that court. Post up. But because he's fighting with Dennis Rodman, doesn't notice that Michael Jordan never cleared out with Jeff Hornacek. Michael Jordan stays on the baseline, comes back around as Karl Malone is looking over his left shoulder to either make his post-up move or see if he can pass the ball to John Stockton or Hornacek or whoever gets open on the other side. Michael Jordan comes behind him, strips the ball, and the rest is history. And even before that, he hits he goes right by Byron Russell for a layup to get them right back into the game. So you have the drive-by on Byron Russell for the quick layup, which was maybe 2 seconds. Then you get the strip, and then you get the famous last shot with the Bulls. Comes down, holds the ball for a little bit, goes strong to his right, gets Byron Russell leaning, gives him a little guidance, pulls up for the shot, buckets. And then the Jazz shoot one last desperation three, which doesn't go in. Bulls win their 6th championship. And a lot of people say that's the greatest sequence they've ever seen from an individual player. I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Controversy and Danny Thompson on their live last night. They talked about this, and they questioned that. Is it the greatest sequence? Because you've had other sequences. You've had the Reggie Miller getting, 8 points in like 8 seconds against the Knicks. You've had Tracy McGrady got 13 points in 33 seconds against the Spurs. Now, the Reggie Miller one was in the first round of the playoffs, and the T-Mac sequence was in the regular season. This being in the finals does make it one of the greatest sequences. Now, the defense on the initial layup was weak. I will give you that. But MJ knew exactly where to go. He knew, he gave him a little hezzy, right past him. The fact that he knew that Karl Malone wasn't going to be looking his direction on baseline to get that strip, the awareness of that makes that great. And then to come down, nerves of steel, boom, boom, little guidance. Wasn't a push off because, as Michael said, he was already leaning that way. So honestly, him putting his hand there was just like a little, him probably just catch his own balance, to be honest with you. And hits the shot. To do that at that stage with that pressure, right? Because you don't want to go to a game 7 with Scotty hurt. You definitely don't want to do that. So if he doesn't do what he is able to do in that sequence, maybe we don't get that last championship. We don't get that epic moment with Mike. We don't get to say, oh, Mike never went to a game 7 in the finals, right? He's only been to 2 game 7 or 3 game 7s in his career. So I do believe that's the greatest sequence we've seen from an individual in a basketball game. So we're going to take our next music break. When I come back, just give my overall thoughts on The Last Dance and then close out the show. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is radio station WSKEE. We're taking calls on the wish line, making your wacky wishes come true.
Hello? I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat, 6 foot baller. I wish I was like 6'9", so I could get with Leoshi, cause she don't know me, but yo, she's really fine. You know I see her all the time, everywhere I go, and even in my dreams, I can scheme a ways to make her mine. Cause I know she's living fat. Her boyfriend's tall and he plays ball, so how am I gonna compete with that? Cause when it comes to playing basketball, I'm always last to be picked, and in some cases never picked at all. So I just lean up on the wall. ball, or sit up in the bleachers with the rest of the girls who came to watch they man ball. Dag y'all, I never understood black, why the jocks get the fly girls and me I get the hood rats. I tell them scat, skittles, kabobble, got hit with a bottle, was in the hospital for talking that mess. I confess it's a shame when you living in a city that's the size of a box and nobody knows your name. Glad I came to my senses, like quick, got sick to my stomach, overcome it by thoughts of me and her together, right? So when I asked her out, she said I wasn't a type. I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller, I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor. I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller, I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor. I wish I had a brand new car. So far I got this hatchback, and everywhere I go, yo, I get laughed at. And when I'm in my car, I'm laid back. I got an 8-track and a spare tire in the back seat, but that's flat. And do you wanna know what's really whack? See, I can't even get a date, so what you think of that? I heard that prom night is a bomb night with a hood ratchet and old type of Rito. On Figaro, when in my car, I can't even get a hello. Well, so many people wanna cruise Crenshaw on Sunday. One day I'ma have to get in my car and go. You know, I take the 110 until the 105. Get off on Crenshaw, tell my homies look alive. Cause it's hard to survive when you're living in the concrete jungles and these girls keep passing me by. She looks fly, she looks fly. Make me say, my. I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor. I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor. I wish I was a little bit taller, was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I was a little bit taller, was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I was a little bit taller, y'all. I wish I was a baller. I wish I was a little bit taller, was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. Hey, I wish I had my way, cause every day would be a Friday. You can even speed on the highway. I would play ghetto games, name my kids ghetto names. Little Mookie, Big Al, Lorraine. Yo, you know that's on the real. So if you down on your luck, then you should know just how I feel. Cause if you don't want me around, see I go simple, I go easy, I go Greyhound. Hey, you, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Ah, yes, ain't that fresh? Everybody wants to get down like that. Wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor. I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" parlor.
Welcome back to The Real Deal with Damian Adams. Hopefully you enjoyed that music break. So now let's get into a little bit more of episode 10 and then my recap of what I liked and disliked about the docu-series. So at the end of episode 10, they talk about Jerry Reinsdorf says that he offered Phil a contract to come back. He offered him a chance to come back. And Phil didn't want to come back and be part of the rebuild. Right? Now, part of me understands knowing that a rebuild is coming because the players were getting older, especially Dennis. Dennis was 35, 36 at this point. MJ was 35. Scotty was 32 and already very unhappy with the situation because of his contract. Ron Harper was up there as well. Tony Kukoc, Luke Longley, those guys were a little younger. Steve Kerr was a little younger. But the core of the team was getting older, right? And the championships were getting closer and closer to not happening, right? But from a money standpoint, why not try to bring the band back together for one more year? MJ talked about how if you ask everybody on that team, let's go one more time, they could win their 7th ring. And I believe they could have won number 7. That shortened 99 year where it's 50 games is a sprint. You bring that team together. Dennis Rodman on that squad probably still has motivation. Once he left the Bulls, it was pretty much over. He still had great rebounding numbers, but didn't play as many games. So maybe you're able to get one more year out of Dennis Rodman, one more year out of Mike. Mike probably could have gave you a couple more years. If he continues playing, because we saw when he was with the Wizards, he still could score. But the years off and being 38, 39, 40 years old slowed him down. So if he continues to play, he still would have been the best player in the league. So I think they get one more in 99, and then in 2000 is where it fizzles out. I could see them losing to the Pacers in 2000, because in 2000 the Pacers are even better than they were in 98 with the emergence of Jalen Rose, who was the most improved player that year, along with Reggie Miller and the rest of that crew. And they made the finals, lost to the Lakers. So even if the Bulls get past the Pacers, I don't see them beating Shaq, prime, dominant Shaq, the emerging Kobe Bryant at that point. I don't see him beating that squad. It'll have been tough. It'll have been a good series, but I can see them going out in that series, and I don't think that hurts their legacy, honestly. My main man, Mr. Controversy, said that Jerry Krause kind of saved their legacy because we've never seen them lose at full strength. If they're older and they make it to the finals and they lose to the Lakers in 6, I don't think there's any shame in that. Or if they lose to the Spurs that next year in 99 in the finals, I don't think there's any shame in that with the combination of big men that they had in Tim Duncan and David Robinson. That would have been tough. You should have let them go out on their shield and see how many they can win before it was all over. And plus, the money. How much money are you making with Michael Jordan on your team? You go from that to having Tim Floyd as your coach with Tyson Chandler, Eddie Curry, and those guys during the rebuild. As you might want to keep the money train going as long as possible. That's one thing that I would want. And I still don't think we ever got an answer to, just speaking to the docu-series as a whole now, I don't think we got an answer to what exactly happened between Phil Jackson and Jerry Krause. I posted a meme about it after episode 4, which was about Phil Jackson. And people were like, oh, you still got 6 episodes left. We never got that answer. Now, sometimes a relationship can have a bunch of little things happen to where it just eats at the relationship, and next thing you know, there's no way to bring that relationship back. But the way it was put in the series, you would think it was just Jerry Krause being jealous of the fact that Phil Jackson was getting all this love and all this credit. And the players were getting all this love and all this credit. I do like that even Scotty at the end had to give Jerry Krause credit and say that he believes he's the greatest GM. Now, that could be argued, but he definitely was a great GM. And when you think about late 80s, 90s, he did his thing, and you could say he was the GM of the decade. Made some great moves, but he also made some horrible moves. Being in a hurry to get rid of Phil Jackson is a horrible move. You win 5, 6 championships. There's no way you should be like, all right, you're gone after this year. You got us 5 championships. No matter how good your team does, you're gone. That's crazy. There's somehow you have to be able to salvage that relationship in some type of way to where you can continue to work. There's no way that relationship should just be done. No way. For the docu-series itself, I do wish they would have done something with Craig Hodges. I understand that Craig Hodges and Michael Jordan don't have the best relationship, and Michael Jordan did have final say. But that's a very interesting story, and that's what we're here for. We're for the interesting stories. I understand that there's all, you got 10 hours, but you could have did, 11, 12 episodes, honestly, with all the footage they had. And Craig Hodges' story is a very interesting story. Why did him and MJ have such a bad relationship? Why did he not, get signed to the NBA after the 92 season when he was a part of a championship team and still was a very good shooter? His, efforts to be an activist cost him big time, right? And I think that's something that should have been covered and touched on. I understand they didn't want to make this political at all, but you had those elements there. We had where they talked about Jordan and his line about Republicans buy sneakers too. So you already had that element in the room. Why not address it fully with Craig Hodges as well? So when you talk about the part where people are upset with MJ not backing the candidate in North Carolina, Craig Hodges' part could have been intertwined in that episode. It didn't have to be a full episode about Craig Hodges. I understand Craig Hodges wasn't a great player, but his story was an interesting story. Just like Steve Kerr had an interesting story. It should have been in there. Honestly, there's not much more I can nitpick at, and that's something that's probably outside of the director's hands. I thought Jason Hare did a great job of putting everything together, the editing team, the way they put certain things into order was awesome. The music selection was very good. I'm listening to the Last Dance soundtrack on Spotify. Like, it was a very good selection of songs. So the series did a great job of bringing to light how great Michael Jordan was. It's going to increase the GOAT debate. I'm not going to take part in it because I just believe now it's been overdone. The whole Michael Jordan versus LeBron, or Michael Jordan versus Kobe, or Michael versus Kareem, Michael versus Magic. They all have an argument to be the GOAT. But I believe Michael's argument is the greatest, being the fact that he played in the modern era. So with Bill Russell, he has the most championships, but he did it in an era where there was only, 8 teams or whatever. So with Mike, you get the opportunity to play against all these teams, all these great players, and he captivated us with his style, with the way he played. So overall, got to give it an A. I'm not going to go A+ because of the lack of Craig Hodges in the documentary, but I give it an A for everything. Just the music, the nostalgia, the footage, the rawness of it. I thought it was very well done. So bravo to everybody who had a part in it. I'll probably rewatch it on Netflix, to be honest with you. But I definitely loved it, man. And that's it for today's episode. Told you it's going to be a short one, a mini one. Probably going to come back later this week and regrade the 2002 NFL draft. I really like doing that. Please let me know what you think of those episodes. Please follow me at The Real Deal WDA. That's The Real Deal, W as in whiskey, D as in Delta, A as in Alpha. And that's on all platforms. Share this podcast with your friends if you like it. Please share it with whoever you know would enjoy it, right? I would truly, truly appreciate it. Until next time, go real or go home.